It is the first competitive congressional race in the country since the presidential election. And the eyes of the country are on us here in the 6th District, like it or not. And it's not every year or every election that so much attention is paid to what happens here in the 6th District. But I think that this community is rising to the occasion. And it's got nothing to do with me and everything to do with the times and the kind of community that we are, that is eager to get organized, get enthusiastic, rally behind a positive vision for what our community and our country can be in the face of fear and division, to instead embrace and lead the way toward a more open, kinder, more prosperous, stronger, more secure, more decent future. And that's the kind of vision that I hope the campaign has been providing. Not negativity, not more partisanship, not merely what we're opposed to, but what we're for. So I'll give you a little bit of background how we got here, how I got here. I was born and raised in Metro Atlanta. I grew up in the 6th Congressional District, very close by here, over in 30345, North DeKalb County. Probably some of you from the neighborhood. Went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service, where I studied international relations. I worked on Capitol Hill for 5 years in the office of Congressman Hank Johnson, specializing in defense and national security policy. And I learned a lot about how things get done in Congress and a lot about how things don't. I learned the legislative process, learned how to conduct congressional oversight of the executive branch and government contractors, the importance of good constituent service, which is just as important to the thriving of a community as the big partisan legislative fights, connecting veterans with the VA and making sure that service members deployed abroad are getting what they need from the Department of Defense. But I also saw the pettiness and the gridlock and the partisanship and the corruption, and I ultimately decided to leave. So in 2012, I went and got a master's degree from the London School of Economics, and now I run a small business that specializes in anti-corruption and organized crime investigations for international news broadcasters. We produce documentary films all over the world to expose the abuse of power, as well as some frontline conflict reporting. And this has been the most rewarding few years of my life so far, learning how to grow a business, doing work I believe in, and I had no plans to get back into politics anytime soon until November. And I've spoken to people across the political spectrum, across the district, about the presidential election, and there's a range of views. And more than a lesson about any candidate or party or campaign, I think what we learned is that there's been a real loss of faith in American politics and in our institutions of government. And that the solution is to rebuild the public trust by holding those institutions accountable and rooting out waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption that have become rampant in Washington. And that is why I decided to run. Because with my background as a congressional aide, as an investigative journalist who's been working on anti-corruption investigations around the world, I want to work to hold Washington accountable and to clean up government. And I think that that is a message that can unite people, because rooting out waste and corruption and abuse and fraud are not partisan issues. But the recognition that Washington is not accountable to folks is almost universal. I'm running a positive campaign that is focused on accountability and a vision for our local economy. We got some of the brightest young people going to some of the best public schools in the state, going to UGA, Georgia Tech, Georgia State. They're getting degrees in science, technology, engineering, and math. Then they're going to Palo Alto or Boston, because even though we've got a booming and growing tech sector here, we still don't have enough of the jobs they're looking for. I mean, Alpharetta alone now has 600 tech companies. It's about 189,000 people employed in technology across Metro Atlanta. But we can do more to make Metro Atlanta an economic powerhouse that's the envy of the rest of the country, the Silicon Valley of the South. And a member of Congress can go and attract investment and jobs and make the case that growing organizations should put new facilities and headquarters and research centers here. And finally, I'm talking about some shared values that are at risk right now. And I think one of the reasons that there are so many folks standing up to get involved, and the reason so many of you have been out knocking on doors and been passionate about getting involved in the campaign, is because there's this sense right now that we're at risk of abandoning some core values. I mean, I'm the son of an immigrant. My mother came here from Australia in the late 1960s. My father's grandparents came from Eastern Europe around the turn of the century. There's a sense of our country that we all share, that we were all raised to believe in. That this is a place where anyone can get ahead if you play by the rules. That history continues to move forward toward progress. That we're decent and kind and respectful people. Hasn't always lived up to its potential. But we all have this idea about what our country is and can be. And right now, there's a sense that we may abandon those values, or that we're becoming unmoored from that shared sense of ourselves. And this is the first chance in the country to make a statement that we're holding fast to those values, and that we choose those values over fear, and over scapegoating, and over closing off to the rest of the world. So I thank you all for coming out, and I'm happy to answer your questions. I appreciate you getting involved. The polls are open. The election's upon us. And in fact, there will be an additional early voting location at Dunwoody Library open for the final week of early voting. But a special election is all about turnout. It's all about energy and momentum. It's about getting young people out and casting your votes early and then getting your neighbors out. So I hope you'll join me and my campaign team in making sure that we win this thing outright on April 18th with more than 50% of the vote, and we can do it together. Thank you very much, and happy to take your questions. Sir.
What do you see as some of the main issues in this 6th district that you'll focus on and that you'll argue on our behalf up in Washington?
Well, in order to, the question was about some of the key issues facing the 6th district and how they relate to what's going on in Congress. I'm maintaining a very sharp focus on local economic issues. What will it take? Hello there.
Great to see you.
Great to see you. What will it take to grow Metro Atlanta into what we know it can become? I mean, you know, comparing what we see when we look around now to what I saw when I was growing up here, it's remarkable. It's remarkable how much growth there's been and how much progress. And we are blessed with the busiest airport in the world in Metro Atlanta. In Savannah, we have one of the most important ports on the eastern seaboard. So Georgia is well positioned to be a hub for logistics and international commerce. And Atlanta has a rapidly growing economy with a lot of talent. But we need to expand access to export markets. We need to cut wasteful spending and prioritize research and development to keep the high-tech sector moving forward. We desperately need renewal of our infrastructure. And I think that, you know, and of course we've all known this for decades, but if you had any doubt, I mean, it's been made pretty clear in the last few days that it's potentially a matter of life and death. It's not just a matter of convenience. And when organizations are growing and thinking about where to put new facilities, and when talented workers are thinking about where they want to live, you know, they want to put those facilities somewhere where you can move goods around quickly and where you don't spend 3 hours a day in traffic. So if there is a major infrastructure bill moving through Congress, and it's fiscally responsible and it'll serve the best interests of the 6th district, I don't mind if it comes from the White House. I don't mind if it comes from Republicans in Congress. I don't mind if it comes from Democrats in Congress. If it's right for us, I'll support it. And I think that we might have a great opportunity to push things forward here in Georgia with a big infrastructure package. Brian, we can get some infrastructure yard with that?
I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
All right.
Got a question. So, I'm excited about the campaign.
Uh-huh.
I'm excited about the attention that Six has nationwide. What makes me really nervous is that when the conservatives get back into a corner, they all show up. Sometimes the Democrats have struggling there. So I've also read the success the campaign's had in raising vast amounts of money from donors across the country. What's your plan to make sure you get people out to vote and we get past that 50% mark?
Well, I think that we probably have the largest field operation and the strongest ground game of any congressional campaign ever in Georgia. We've knocked on more than 80,000 doors in just a couple of months. There are more than 8,000 volunteers working on the campaign. There are postcards and phone calls pouring across the district. Now, this is a tough district for a Democrat. But it's also a moderate, pragmatic district where voters judge candidates as individuals rather than just as proxies for the two parties. This is a district where the president won by 1% for that reason. So by presenting a message about local prosperity, shared values, and accountability to build a broad coalition of folks left, right, and center, and by knocking on doors and making phone calls at an unprecedented rate, we're certainly giving it a good effort. But it's also up to everyone here, because this is a 3 or 4 month cycle. Usually there's a year and a half to get a campaign together. There are just limitations to how much outreach we can do. And so I hope that you'll all help in getting the word out. Yes, ma'am.
Could you share with us your feelings about your stand as far as the healthcare issue, and what you would try to do if there's an opportunity to help more people get healthcare coverage in the Congress?
Sure. There are 3 principles that I've proposed we apply to healthcare policy. One is no American should suffer or die from treatable or preventable illness. The second is no one should go broke because they get sick. And the third is no business should have to downsize or lay off employees because they can't keep up with premiums. And there's plenty we can do to push things in the right direction to get more folks covered at better prices with more choices and higher quality care. It just requires us to break out of now 7 years of partisan gridlock since the passage of the Affordable Care Act, and do the nuts and bolts legislating to make that happen. If it means more competition across state lines in the insurance market, or repealing the medical device tax, or providing tax credits to small businesses who are struggling with the price of insurance premiums, those are all things I'm open to, and I'll work with anyone to try to move things in the right direction. The bill that just was moving through Congress, I think, moved things in the wrong direction, because it would have thrown 24 million people off of insurance back into the emergency room when their illness is already acute and it's a taxpayer expense. It would have pushed prices up, especially for folks 50 to 64, while weakening Medicare. And it would have gutted the CDC and our critical pandemic prevention and health security infrastructure, which is a national security issue. So I hope that there will be opportunities to work across the aisle to get things done, to provide more choices at better prices.
Would you urge us to try to expand Medicaid in the state?
I think Georgia should accept the expansion that's been offered. And I think, to reject it as a matter of politics, these are real people. These are children. That is a matter for the state government, but my opinion is that it's shameful.
Very much.
Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about your views on trade policy? I guess the Trans-Pacific Partnership, NAFTA, and I'd especially like to hear what you think about the proposed border adjustment tax.
Sure. I think that what we learned from the TPP and the fate of the TPP is that as we seek to expand international trade, if folks domestically don't have a seat at the table, it'll be impossible to generate the domestic political support necessary to move a treaty like that through Congress. 25% of jobs in Georgia rely on international trade. As I mentioned, between Hartsfield and the port of Savannah, we're a key hub in the global economy. And I think it would be very dangerous for this administration to start going down the path of tit-for-tat, retaliatory trade tactics. It's something that has been tried before at times of economic uncertainty, and it doesn't usually end well. So I think we need to work to expand our access to export markets, to grow Georgia as a hub for international commerce and logistics, while making sure that the negotiating process is transparent enough and that enough folks have access to it to make their concerns heard, whether they're labor or environmental concerns, so that these trade agreements can pass Congress once they're negotiated at the international level. The one case I do think that there might be room for us to use some of the tools in the toolbox is to impose some countervailing duties where foreign nations may manipulate their currencies to reduce the value of goods on international markets. But generally speaking, I think we need to be pretty cautious about it. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion of the proposed defunding of the National Endowment for the Arts, public television? What do you think is the role economically of the arts to this district?
Well, I think you say a lot about your values by how you seek to balance the books. And as we work to achieve fiscal responsibility, and there is plenty of room for belt tightening in Washington, to do so on the backs of folks who are defenseless or at the cost of our own enlightenment, I think is a reflection of the wrong values and the wrong priorities. Yes, sir.
On my way over here, I was watching an ad that was probably one of the vilest things I've ever seen on you. And I mean, if I think this was the congressional committee was running it, and basically, I'm sure we're going to see more and more and more. Since you're the target, what do you plan on doing over the next 2.5 weeks to combat that in the campaign?
Continuing to run a positive, substantive campaign that shows partisan garbage for what it is. That wasn't directed at you. Yes, ma'am.
Washington is very polarizing right now, and the Democrats being in the minority, how do you plan to get things done? I mean, things are not getting done in Washington, and you are joining a minority party. What do you plan to do? How do you plan to work with the White House?
Well, if I'm elected, I will just be one member of the House. So we should not overstate my capacity to transform the culture of the institution or the city. It's tough. At the same time, you got to do it one district at a time. And I learned when I was working as a congressional aide that you can get a lot done in the minority, and that there are actually still glimmers of bipartisanship. For example, every year, the Armed Services Committee passes a Defense Authorization Act, and I would work closely with Republican staffs and offices and members to try to improve the bill and get things done. And I think the infrastructure package that may be moving through Congress is a great example. The only test I will apply to legislation is, does it serve families in the 6th District? And if it does, then I'll support it. And if it doesn't quite, but it might, then I'll work to amend it so it does. And if it doesn't, I won't support it. And hopefully by getting some fresh leadership in there, we can slowly start to change the culture of the place so that it's not marked by such pettiness and division, but instead a focus on trying to get things done. Yes, ma'am. Oh, hold on. Lonnie.
Well, I feel good that you talk about bipartisanship, working in the Congress. I think you need to work with other people to make things work for us, right? But Trump in office 3 months now that he signed all this executive order. So a lot of the, like you mentioned, CDC budget is down, right? It's going to cut, EPA budget is cut 30%. I mean, all this regulation that he deregulated again, and it's going to be a lot of damage for us, and how the Congress can do anything about it.
Well,
I mean, your point of view.
Put it like this. I will work with anyone to accomplish things that are in the interests of the 6th District. And I'll stand up to anyone to oppose what isn't. I went down to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport the night that the executive order came down from the White House on immigration with Congressman Lewis and Congressman Johnson over the objections of some of my political consultants, because it was the right thing to do. And because this is the wrong moment in history to shy away from taking a stand out of political fear. So if it violates our principles, if it's not in our interest, I'll be outspoken in my opposition. Where there's room to get things done that'll help the community, I'll do my best to get things done.
But we still feel disappointed though, because the lyric worked for the people, right? Because this traveling ban, you see a lot of university, the application is already down from foreign students. And the hospitality industry also complaining because foreign tourists also down. And so, I mean, don't people see that the benefit for the United States as a country instead of, few people?
Well, and talking to folks across the 6th District, I've been making the case strongly that, first of all, it's a bad security policy. Stopping everyone at the border coming from 6 or 7 countries is not a national security. It's a political stunt, right? A true national security policy applies the best intelligence available to identify threats before they try to enter, and to police threats that emerge once folks are here. It, as you mentioned, impairs commerce. It discourages tourism. And Atlanta's economy is increasingly reliant, as you know, on enthusiasm for visiting the United States. So a huge number of the folks who aren't even necessarily coming to Atlanta are coming through Atlanta on their way to cities across the country. It put federal agents in an untenable position under political pressure. And there were 6th District families, legal permanent residents, who were detained indefinitely without counsel at the U.S. border, and that's unacceptable. And that's why I went. And that's why I'll continue to speak out against policies like that. But I'll draw the line based on the merits of the policy, not who brought the policy forward.
Well, hopeful.
Sir.
These are all good questions and all very eloquent answers. I'm going to ask you an easy one. Okay. What do you think about Trump? I want to test your diplomacy skills.
There's media here. There's media here.
Room for improvement. Yeah.
Yeah, Sue, I mean, obviously this is hosted with a lot of Asian Americans here in the district. What will you be doing to do more engagement with minority outreach and to listen to more minority issues, and also possibly to engage the younger generation? I know there are a lot of young people who've volunteered to canvass for you. So what things are you doing to do a listening tour, or to hear, or to actually promote more minority engagement in the district?
Well, when you're looking at candidates, it's usually safe to say that folks will govern like they run. And my campaign has dedicated staff doing outreach and organization in the Latino community, in the Asian American community, in the Muslim American community. We are appearing and advertising in community publications. publications and radio. And we are convening faith leaders, business leaders from minority communities in the 6th District to hear their concerns, to begin the work of transition. Because if I am elected, then it'll be important to hit the ground running on day one with everyone who needs to be at the table already at the table. So I don't think that minority constituencies in the 6th have ever gotten the kind of representation that they deserve. And I hope that, although it has been again, this is a short campaign cycle, there's not been time to do all of the outreach in an orderly way that I would have liked to if we had a year and a half. And I know we've had to say to folks, look, I'm sorry you haven't heard from us yet. Please come to us. There's just not enough time to reach out to everyone as aggressively as we'd like to. But I think that the openness of our campaign and the outreach we've been doing, well, it gives you an indication of how we will approach those relationships if I'm elected. And I hope that you've been impressed by what we've tried to do over the last few weeks and months.
Well, I like the fact that your opponents portray you as this Star Wars outfit.
We do like that.
That's awesome.
And in terms of young folks, I think there's a lot of young folks who are interested in a younger candidate. And my team tells me that if we double turnout among folks 18 to 34 from what you'd normally expect in a special election, that I'll win.
But we the old folks, we like young people too.
Well, I like all folks.
I have a simple question too.
Okay.
How long is
That
left
always gets me nervous.
This is really, really simple because I just thought of this. But how long is left in the term?
So whoever wins this election will serve until January of 2019, having, of course, competed to be reelected in the November 2018 midterm. I got time for one more. I saw one from the press. Yes, sir.
Funniest question. See, I'm a minority. I serve a minority. So you support a melting pot or support the blending? You know, the melting pot is Republican always say, you come to my country blending and then eventually disappear. You know, this is the Republicans. They both saying that. And Fabry saying that, and everybody say that. How's your point on that?
That's a great question.
We couldn't hear it.
Can you repeat the question so everyone can hear it?
Yeah, this is what happened is Republicans always come with a melting pot on a culture. Just like the couple generations you're planning and all your culture disappear. But in our community, we have a Chinese school. We teach kids all to speak Chinese, probably generation, in couple generations. On third generation, they basically fade away. But on the Republican view, this is a melting pot. It's you come to the country, blend the country, and take all the countries. Diversity is the first generation, and the second, third is just blending. It just eventually disappears.
Yeah,
there's a huge difference between Democrat and Republican on this kind of thing.
And I don't know what the right metaphor is, but if you think, if I think about my family's experience, coming from Eastern Europe in the early 20th century to a foreign place where my ancestors didn't speak the language and initially spent most of their time in Jewish neighborhoods with other families from the same background. And over time became American while never losing the strong identity and culture that they brought here. And I think that what's unique about the United States is that we don't actually have to make that choice that you laid out. It's not a matter of whether you come to the United States and simply become American and leave your past behind. It's about adding to what it means to be American, all that you bring from wherever we came from, and embracing some of those core American values.
We do have
have several members of the press here. If you are willing, if everybody would stand up and kind of stand in this direction facing here, I'd like the press to come up to the top of the hill and get a group shot with everybody behind John. If you're willing. If you stand off to the side, I'm going to know you're not voting for him. And also, when we're done, we've got a lot of food and wine. We're going to be here